Nation, and this year we're happy to have Vietnam veterans with us. And often I'll say that Vietnam veterans are the most underappreciated generation, especially as veterans. When they came home, they were ridiculed, spit at, and unappreciated from their nation. Our citizens turned on them instead of turning on the politicians that they didn't agree with. And unfortunately, this bared even deeper scar for this generation. They bore the burden for my generation, the Iraq, Afghanistan, Persian Gulf veterans, because our nation realized what they did to the Vietnam veterans were wrong, and they needed to change their ways. For them, our homecomings were bore on their back, and is made better for us. So today we are honoring all our Vietnam veterans, and it is my pleasure to introduce today our speaker, Harold L. Easter. He was a corporal in the Marine Corps from 1969. He was a Master Sergeant in the Pennsylvania Air National Guard from 1974 to 1988. He grew up in Steelton, Pennsylvania. He was married for 46 years to his wife, Linda. He has 3 children and 8 grandchildren. The youngest grandson is now serving in the Marine Corps and is stationed in Afghanistan. He holds a bachelor's and master's degree. He started a law enforcement career in July 1969. He instructed at the police academy. He is currently the chief of North Lebanon Township Police in 2005 to the present. The chief had approached me one day, and he's one of the first people that always says he'll be in the parade to lead a division. And he approached me one day. He said, "Bill, is there a reason I'm not with the Vietnam vets?" And I said, "I didn't know you were a Vietnam vet." So every year now, he leads the Vietnam division. And so it's with my great pleasure to introduce you to Chief Harold Easter, North Lebanon Township Police.
The question I have is, what does it mean to we Americans? For many it means just another holiday, long weekend. For others it means, well, today's the day we open up pools, cookouts, get-togethers. But the real meaning of this day is to honor those who have paid the ultimate price and given their full measure of devotion to ensure our freedom. It's our opportunity today to stop and give thanks for the 1,321,621 Marines, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen who have died in the service of their country from the Revolutionary War to Afghanistan. Today is the day we set aside to remember our fallen heroes, and we pray no more heroes will ever have to die for us again. Today is a day of thanks for the valor of all our men and women who proudly wear the uniform of our nation. For a moment, I'd like to take you to Arlington National Cemetery. There you would discover a place of memories. It's a place fitting for remembering those who have given so much. At Arlington, we find some of the great military leaders of our nation like Admiral Bull Halsey, Blackjack Pershing, General Omar Bradley, but there are others buried there. We have never seen their faces, but we know of their valor in the face of the enemy. Many refer to we who have served in combat as heroes, but the real heroes are the ones in those graves. Many untold stories, many unmarked graves, and today we honor their memory. Another name found at Arlington is Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy, what a wild, courageous man he was. Particularly that day when he climbed on top of a burning tank in the face of an advance of a strong German force. On that day, he saved many of his troops as he rallied them, and he did it single-handedly. When Lieutenant Murphy radioed for artillery support, he was asked, "How close is the enemy?" And he replied, "Wait a minute, I can let you talk to him." His actions on that day won him the Congressional Medal of Honor. Another example of the men and women who die and lie in those hallowed graves Scattered throughout the United States and in foreign soils is Oliver Wendell Holmes. This great jurist and fighter of the rights, as a young soldier in the Civil War, wrote this: "At the grave of a hero, we end not with sorrow at the inevitable loss, but with the contagion of his courage. And with a kind of desperate joy, we go back to the fight." All of our heroes were different in many ways, but they shared this one thing in common. They all loved America, and they gave their best for her. It's difficult not to think of our young men and women in a place like Arlington or Indiantown Gap or any place that they lie in graves. For it's our youth who do the fighting. Those 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are called into harm's way when peace fails and war begins. And not far from Arlington Cemetery, there's a statue of 3 young men, the 3 fighting boys of Vietnam. It's there that we see majesty and even more. Maybe you've seen that statue. 3 rough-looking young men walking together, looking ahead with a steady gaze. There is something wounded about them, a kind of resigned toughness. But there's an unexpected tenderness, too. At first, you don't notice it, but then you see it. There are 3 touching each other, as if they are supporting each other, helping each other on. It's a sort of dependence on each other. It's as if they are saying to each other, "I have your back, and I know you have mine." I know many of you fellow veterans of Vietnam will gather today in small groups and maybe larger groups to remember those who have given their very best. Some will gather in Washington, D.C. at the wall to mourn and honor our brother veterans. And remember those 58,209 who died in the jungles and on the mountaintops and the rice paddies of Vietnam. It's at the wall we see Vietnam veterans and their families still helping each other on. We were quite a group, we boys of Vietnam. Just boys who fought a terrible and vicious war without a lot of support from the world. That's what we called home. We were just boys who were dodging bullets while America debated the efficacy of the war. It was us boys who raised our right hands and vowed to protect the country from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And so we picked up a rifle and marched on into harm's way. Vietnam veterans, as did all veterans of all wars, learned to rely on each other. We chose to be faithful. We chose to reject the skepticism of those days. We chose to believe and answer the call of duty. We boys of Vietnam possess the wild courage of the youth of America. We seized certainty from the heart of an ambivalent age. We stood for something. We as a nation owe our dead. Those who lie in the graves of foreign soils, those who are still missing in action, all those who have fought for freedom, and for their families, we owe them a promise. Just as we did not forget our missing comrades in Vietnam, neither must Americans ever forget what has been sacrificed for freedom's sake. There are other promises too. We must always remember that peace is a fragile thing that demands vigilance. We owe our veterans, past and present, especially those now serving, a promise too. To always look at the world with a steady gaze and with a resigned toughness, knowing that we have adversaries in the world who present many challenges to our nation. The only way to meet these challenges and maintain peace is by staying militarily strong. This is the lesson of the 20th century, a lesson learned in the Sudetenland, in Poland, in Hungary, in Czechoslovakia, in Cambodia, and more recently in the Middle East. If we really care about peace, we must stay strong as a nation. If we really care about peace, we must, through strength, demonstrate our unwillingness to accept the end of peace. We must be strong enough to create peace and where it does not exist, and strong enough to protect it where it does exist. This is the lesson learned during the last century, and one we must never forget. Just the other day, I was at the police academy, and a young man came up to me, and he said, I believe you were in the 26th Marines in Vietnam. I was. He said, were you there during the siege of Khe Sanh? I said, I was. He says, you know, my dad was there too at the same time, but he was on Hill 861. And on Hill 861, he was wounded. And he went on to tell me the story of his dad, how he struggled with the aftermath of Vietnam, drugs and alcohol and anger, post-traumatic stress disorder. He suffered all his life. Then he told me last year the war caught up with his dad and he died from the long-lasting effects of Agent Orange. He then extended his hand and said, thank you for your service. For me, that was a moving moment. And as I took his hand, it was special. Because I hadn't thought about the war and how we boys of Vietnam were not thanked when we came back, how our sacrifices were not appreciated, how we weren't welcomed back as a group. We young men who were forever changed by the war were called baby killers, potheads, and spat upon. It was by our fellow Americans. We young men use words that are special to us. We call each other brothers because we served our nation. We endured the endurable. This young man who shook my hand, his words and the handshake became a healing moment for me. Thank you for the honor of allowing me to express what it means to me this day. I'd like to close with these words. There's a code all Marines, past and present, live by. Those words are honor, courage, and commitment. And we Marines have a saying. It's in Latin. Semper Fidelis. It means always faithful. We will remain always faithful to our country, to our God, and to the core. Thank you, all you veterans, and welcome home. Thank you.